Welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
My name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode 2, where we're going to be talking about a fantasy sort of RPG from Fantasy Flight Games called The Legacy of Dragonholt, which might actually be the most boring fantasy name of all time.
Yeah, I keep forgetting it, actually. I can't remember what the name is. I just know it has a dragon in it.
Right. It has a dragon. It has a Holt, whatever a Holt is. And it has a very misleading title because this isn't actually a legacy game at all. So we'll be talking about that in this episode. But first, we're going to talk about the news and share some of what's been going on in the world of solo board games over the last couple of weeks. So first of all, this is a big month for Kickstarter solo games. So the first of those projects that's on Kickstarter right now is called Nemesis. And Nemesis is, I think, the third game from Awaken Realms, which is the company that did This War of Mine and Lords of Hellas, two really big games. This War of Mine in particular has been really big for solo board gamers over the last year. And this new game, Nemesis, looks sort of like the Alien movies. You are soldiers or medics or technicians on board this spaceship, and you wake up from cryo sleep and the ship is filled with these xenomorph-looking aliens. It has a solo mode, it has a semi-co-op mode, and it raised $4.2 million, which is insane. So there's that game going on, plus there's also another game called Pulp Detective. It has this 1930s and 40s art that's taken directly from pulp novels, and you're trying to solve a crime. And it's unique, I think, because it's one of the few games that's made it its way to Kickstarter that's actually a solo game first, and it just happens to have a 2-player variant. The artwork looks great. It's already made a ton of money on Kickstarter, and I expect that it will continue to do so over the next few weeks.
So are both of those games finished with their Kickstarters yet?
Well, Nemesis is finished with its Kickstarter. Pulp Detective is still going. I think it still has a few days left. So if you're listening to this, try to jump on it right now if you can. Outside the realm of Kickstarter, Galacta Publishing has announced This War of Mine, Tales from the Ruined City. This War of Mine is a game that is about surviving warfare. It's sort of maybe a higher-minded game is a good way to say it. It's a game with a message that's being hailed as more of an intellectual type experience. Sobering experience, not necessarily something that you have fun with, right? Like playing Freedom the Underground Railroad, for instance.
Right.
But it's a game that's gotten a lot of praise from solo gamers in particular, and now it has its first expansion on the way. So there's not a lot of information about it yet, just one picture with some cryptic information that made its way to Facebook yesterday, and seems like it adds some new people, the ability to go underground, and sounds like there will be more to it than that, but there's just not a lot yet. So no release date on that yet, but definitely something to keep an eye on. The other big story about games that are coming out is Board Game Geek did coverage of, and I'm going to butcher this, Spielwarenmesse?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's the correct pronunciation. They covered this game fair in Germany, and at this fair, they were able to see a lot of new games from Lookout Games in particular, and some pretty exciting stuff for solo gamers. So the first thing that caught my eye was a Caverna, The Lost Peoples expansion. So this is pretty interesting because this is the first expansion for Caverna, aside from a few little promo things here and there. And I've been surprised that Lookout hasn't been supporting this because in my mind, I played Caverna 2 or 3 times. I can definitely see the need for some expansions here. This is exactly the sort of thing that would make me interested in this game again. The Lost Peoples expansion is going to have 8 different species or races that are going to be added to the game. So you can play as elves or dark elves or trolls or the dwarves from the base game. And each one of those races has its own special advantages and disadvantages.
Right. Yeah. Actually, several months ago, I actually played with one of our friends with that copy. Yeah. And it added a lot for me.
Yeah. If you're interested in this, you actually can play it right now because the unique thing about this is that it's a fan-made expansion that just gained enough traction on Board Game Geek that they're publishing it. Lookout Games is actually publishing it.
And yeah, I didn't realize that. That's great.
Yeah, this is very exciting. For me, the problem with Caverna was that it doesn't have the setup variability that I look for in a game. And I'm a sucker for player powers, and I love the variability that adds. So I think this could really breathe some new life into that. So since Caverna has a pretty solid solo following too, if you're one of those people, you want to take a look at this. The next thing that they announced, or at least showed off just barely, is there's going to be some kind of new expansion for the 2-player version of Caverna that's called Cave vs. Cave. It came out last year, I think, at Essen, and it's gotten a lot of love. It's a very stripped down, streamlined version of Caverna that has a solo mode in the box. So I don't read German, and Board Game Geek folks did not go into a lot of details on what this actually is, but it has Cave vs. Cave on the box in German, and then it has the number 2. It's like, I don't know if this is a sequel or an expansion or what, but there's something new coming out for Cave vs. Cave.
Okay. So is Cave vs. Cave already out? Are you saying?
Cave vs. Cave. Caverna Cave vs. Cave came out at Essen last year.
Okay.
So this is either a sequel or an expansion or something.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
And so they also had a picture that included 2 new versions of Patchwork, which, as I understand it, does also have some solo variants available on BGG. That's Patchwork Express and Patchwork Extreme. The word extreme not being something that I associate with a game that's about, quilting.
Yeah. It could just be like 90s marketing where you just put X's on everything.
Right.
Like a bag of Doritos.
Well, this definitely continues, whatever it is, it definitely continues Uwe Rosenberg's trend of making these polyomino games where you try to fit pieces Tetris style onto a board. So anybody who's interested in that, this is a good year for Uwe Rosenberg games. And the last thing that showed up in the picture that the BGG folks took of the Lookout booth was an expansion for Nusfjord called the Schollen deck. And I'm probably mispronouncing that too. Schollen, Skollen, it doesn't matter. What matters is this is more cards for Nusfjord. And we're going to get to Nusfjord at some point in this show, but spoiler alert, I love it. I love it a lot. And I care about this way more than I care about the Caverna expansion. And I'm excited about that too. No release dates for any of those things yet. I expect that we'll see most of them at Essen probably, so look for those. And the last thing, speaking of Lookout, the biggest news of the week for sure is that Asmodee, the large company that's been buying up tons and tons of these smaller board game companies in the last 3 years.
And not so small companies also.
And not so small companies, right? Because they've already snatched up companies like Plaid Hat and F2Z Entertainment and Z-Man. Mm-hmm. I mean, some pretty large, substantial companies. This week they announced that they have purchased Lookout Games and Mayfair Games, which is a pretty big deal because Lookout Games has been making some of the biggest Euro games on the market for the last several years. Mayfair Games is still a huge presence in the industry. Their popularity has gone down quite a bit in the last few years, I think. But if you go to Gen Con, Mayfair Games has a whole room, essentially, where they show off their games. And we've known that something's been going on with Mayfair for a while because they haven't been putting out any press releases. And a few years ago, they actually sold Catan to Asmodee. Whether they were hoping to get an influx of cash from that sale of Catan to try to jumpstart their business, or whether they knew the writing was on the wall, we're not quite sure about that, but it does mean that one of the giants of the industry is absorbed now into the Asmodee machine. So absorbing into a machine doesn't quite work as a figure of speech, but you get the gist.
Right.
The Asmodee blob.
Asmodee blob, right.
So that's the news of the week. There are lots of exciting things on the horizon for solo gamers, even if it does mean that one company is making the majority of those games at this point.
Just slowly going around the board game world, decapitating and becoming the supreme Highlander.
There can be only one. Thankfully, there's not just one yet. If you go to a convention, you will still see tons and tons of publishers. So a lot of people will react to this like the sky is falling. I don't think it is yet. It's getting pretty close. But there are still lots of new publishers cropping up every day. So, plus there are companies like Simon, for instance, that are really coming along in terms of the games that they put out. They're becoming a real powerhouse to be reckoned with. Renegade Games is becoming a powerhouse. So there's still these large companies out there that can provide some competition for a company like Asmodee. All right, but that's it for the news. We're going to go ahead and start looking at our game of the week, which is Legacy of Dragonholt.
So, Brandon, were you surprised when you found out that Dragonholt was actually on a wildlife preserve in modern-day America?
I was terribly surprised by that. I really thought it was a bold choice, though. I also really love the introduction of lawnmowers into this fantasy world. Really gives it kind of a nice, clean, modern edge to it, don't you think?
Yeah, and especially just like some modern combat systems like kill streaks. It just really made gameplay more engaging.
Absolutely. And as you can probably tell, that was total bull. We're definitely not going to spoil this game for you, right? There are no lawnmowers in Legacy of Dragonholt, or if there are, I'm not going to spoil them for you. There are no kill streaks.
Right.
As far as you know.
M. Night Shyamalan doesn't make any like real subtle cameos at any point during the adventure.
Thank God. Instead, what you have in Legacy of Dragonholt is a pretty straightforward attempt at trying to make a board game version of an RPG, sort of. That's been done before. Dungeon crawlers have existed for a while where you actually have little pieces that you move around a map and you fight enemies. This is not quite that. This is something new that's Fantasy Flight is introducing that they're calling their Oracle system. And the idea is that this system can be used for a variety of different game worlds. But essentially, what this is trying to create is a DM-less RPG. So you don't have to have one person who's running the game, who's coming up with the story for everyone else and managing stats for NPCs, that sort of thing. What this is you can sit down alone or with your friends and open this game and you have a fully fledged sort of RPG for you to delve into with character creation and, character sheets and a big epic adventure that you can dig into right there in the box without having to have somebody else try to take the reins of it. That's right. The idea behind this thing.
Right.
And it's set in a pretty standard fantasy world, right?
Yeah, nothing like radically departing from like standard, I guess, essentially high fantasy kind of tropes and imagery.
That's my impression of it as well. It's got dragons, it's got fighters and barbarians and orcs and all the standard stuff you'd expect to find in any fantasy setting, only it's a DM-less RPG. So That's it. And it can be played solo. And it's been getting a lot of buzz as a solo game on Board Game Geek and on the Solo Board Gamers Facebook group. And so we thought maybe this would be the perfect game to start out covering in this podcast because it's new and it's something that we haven't really seen before in games. So we're going to start out just by telling you, first of all, when you get into an RPG, if you've ever seen a Dungeons & Dragons handbook, you've seen that it's huge.
Right. It actually, from like a core component standpoint, you have the player's handbook and then you have the DM's guide, so you have two core books to really run the game.
Right. And in order to play the game well, you really need to read through that player book, at least. If you're a player, you need to read through the player handbook and have a pretty good grasp of what's going on. And you're talking 200 pages in one of these books.
Right? I think it's more than that.
Maybe more than that. Mm-hmm. If you're DMing the game, you need to be familiar with the player's end, and you need to have read a Dungeon Master's Guide of some kind, which is another 200, 300 pages of material.
Right. Prepping adventures, even if you're buying published adventures, still more material that you have to prepare. A lot of front end work.
A lot of front end work. And one of the things that this game tries to do to change that standard formula is to really trim down. What kind of experience did you have reading the rules for this game?
I feel like the best way to describe it is you really don't have to read the rules. There is like a rule index, and I think you start there technically. I can't remember for sure at this point, but basically you can just start going through character creation, and it introduces the rules as you need them. And then when just for character creation, so you understand what you're doing enough, And then when you move into the adventure, if there's like an encounter of sorts that requires an additional rule explanation, is right there next to it. And it only introduces those things as a on-need basis.
Right. And there's a little 4-page rule book that comes in the box. And once you read that, it leads you right into character creation. And to me, that's one of the great things about this game is there is so little upfront work before you are actually already started creating a character. There's very little upfront work to start with creating a character. And the rules do a great job of just introducing things to you bit by bit as you go. Mm-hmm. Even after you've created a character, you still haven't covered all the rules in the game.
Right.
But as you go through an adventure, the game is comprised of these books, essentially. There's a handful of character sheets, a small deck of cards, a few tokens, and then 4 or 5 books inside this box. One book that tells you about the main village of Dragonholt, where you can go and interact with people there. And then 4 or 5 other books where you can go on different quests. So if you go on a quest, you delve into its own little book. So as you go through one of those books and you're interacting with people or fighting somebody, if a new mechanic is introduced, there's a little sidebar in the book that tells you in a paragraph or 2 what you need to know, and you're just on your way again.
Right. It's very when they add the new rules or whatever, it's very straightforward and quick to read. It's not like you don't feel like you're trudging through it. It's just, I know this thing now, and you can move on.
Yes. And to me, that is definitely one of the strengths of this game. And so you're able to read the rules quickly, and then before you know it, you're on to character creation, which is... Right. This game bills character creation as a very big part of the experience, which is what you would expect from any RPG, really.
Right. I feel like most people, that's a really enjoyable part for them. I mean, it varies from person to person, but a lot of people love the character creation part and imagining this.
Yeah. For me, I've played 2 short-ish campaigns of Dungeons & Dragons, so I don't have a lot of role-playing experience. But I did really enjoy that part of rolling up the character and trying to come up with how my character looks and what my character's motivations are and trying to set the stage for the adventure that was to come. And that's one of the things that the rules push really hard is this game allows you to do whatever you want. If you want to be a brawler, you can be a brawler. If you want to be the kind of person who's like a sorcerer or a cleric, you can do that. If you want to be a rogue, you can do that. If you want to be somebody who excels in speechcraft, you can do any of those things. This is supposed to be able to handle an RPG-like experience within the bounds of this kind of character creation.
It also, it has a section dedicated to just coming up with your background
right.
as a part of that. So it really encourages you thinking about the personality traits of your character to help you roleplay your character better during the actual gameplay.
Right. And so the way you actually work this out practically is you have a character sheet and the rules walk you through this process of picking which race you want to be. And your race choices are, humans and orcs and dwarves and elves. And then the only thing you aren't expecting to find in a standard fantasy world is the cat folk, which are this really goofy looking race of people that are just basically cats that walk upright and wear clothing.
Right.
Yeah. Apart from the cat folk, it's very standard fantasy fare. So you pick your race, and then you pick a series of skills. And the way this game works is you start out with, if you're playing solo, you have 18 stamina, which is your health for the game. And you're able to pick 5 skills from this pool of, 20 plus skills that they have available in this game.
That sounds about right.
So you pick 5 skills, and then after you're done picking skills, you can pick more than 5, but for every extra skill you pick, you lower your max stamina by 2 or 3 points each. So you have this balancing act during character creation where you're already making very meaningful decisions. Do I want to have higher health but fewer skills? Or do I want to have more skills but be a little squishier in the process?
Right. I feel like it's worth specifying that stamina isn't necessarily like combat health. It's
right.
it's basically a resource for doing more activities.
Yeah, so that includes when you do get hit, you do lose stamina.
Right.
But you can also lose stamina from running fast from an enemy or something, or climbing a rock wall, or
working in an orchard.
Yes, which is possible in this game.
Right.
So the character creation, right from character creation, you're already making these pretty interesting decisions. And as the rules tell you, the skills that you pick, there are a few skills you have to pick depending on what kind of race or class you've picked for your character. And then beyond that, you can flesh it out however you want to. And these skills matter because you can add more skills in this game, but it's definitely not easy to do.
No, it takes a lot. And I didn't completely finish this game, which you did, right?
I came close to finishing this game, but we'll get to why I didn't exactly finish it later. But I got to about as far as I felt like I could in the game. We'll say that.
Right. And I didn't get as far. But yeah, I mean, it seemed like it would take a very long time to add additional skills to my character. And wasn't honestly anything I was really interested in because I made the character I more or less wanted at character creation.
Yes, I did too. I spent a long time trying to create a character, and I followed the rules advice and really tried to flesh out a background and motivations, and I ended up with a gnome brawler, kind of an older guy who had lost his wife and kept to himself now. He would steal if he had to. He would brawl if he had to. But he was a helpful guy generally, loyal to his friends, but not the kind of guy who would go out of his way to look for trouble. And I wanted to see if this kind of system could handle that, because it says in the rules that it can. So that's the kind of character I went with. Who did you go with, Carter?
I made a just really old, kind of a standard like magic elf user that's interested in arcane, kind of intellectual pursuits, not as interested in like the typical mortal interest or desires. And yeah, I wanted to see how that worked also with someone who's not necessarily like a jerk, but it's just kind of neutral or cool towards the concerns of other NPCs.
So we feel like we got a pretty good, well-rounded experience of what this game has to offer between the two of us, because we ended up picking pretty different races and classes so that we could get a fuller experience of the game. And going into this, I have to say I was very excited about what was coming, because I really put a lot of work into my character. I felt like I was getting the vibe I needed to from this game for it to be a good role-playing experience, even if I'm not crazy about the sort of generic fantasy tone of the world. Mm-hmm. And I think catfolk are stupid.
Right.
Beyond that, I was still excited for what was coming. And so after you finish character creation, then you get into the actual meat of the game. And you, at the beginning of the game, inside the box, along with these rule books and the books where you're going to have your actual encounters, you find a letter from a friend of yours who's calling you to this village of Dragonholt to help her with a problem that she has. And we won't go more into it than that because we don't want to spoil it for you. But the gist of it is you end up going to this Dragonholt village to help your friend. On your way to this village, you have sort of a tutorial adventure that you go through that gets its own little quest book. And as an extension of what we said before about the rules and the simplicity, we can't go into what happens during that quest, but I will say that it does a great job of introducing you to combat. It does a great job of introducing you to how NPCs are handled in this game. And it's really a means of getting you from you are nobody in this world to now you are a person who is in Dragonholt for a reason.
Right.
And when you get to Dragonholt, there's a book dedicated to just finding your way around this village. And it is much thicker than the quest books. We're talking 300 pages, maybe?
I can't remember. I never actually looked at the page count, but there was, it's much, much bigger.
Yes.
than anything else in there.
It's a very involved... This is where your character is really going to start working its way through the real world. So you get to this village, and you get a map of the village when you're there. And so alongside your character sheet now, you have a book for having adventures in this village. You have a map with numbered locations that you can visit, just like you were playing a game like Skyrim or something. You can stop by an armorer's shop, or you can stop by the tavern. And when you are ready to visit one of those places, you look up a numbered entry in the Dragonholt book, and it will tell you what's going on at that location when you arrive. And what's going on really depends on what time of day it is, which to me is one of the more interesting things about this game.
Yeah, I guess I don't think we've mentioned this before. I mean, the basic flow of this is a choose-your-own-adventure book with added game mechanics to it.
Right.
And those game mechanics, the way they work is marking off plot points after you've had different little encounters or interactions that kind of tracks what conversations have happened or different things that have happened and kind of change the world state. They will make time pass, and there's, in each adventure or in town, there's a set amount of time, and you're marking those things down, and that changes also what your potential interactions or, I guess, different paths are at different locations or at just different points along an adventure.
So the way that works out is you have, in addition to your character sheet, you also have like an adventure tracking sheet that tracks your progress in the main game as a whole, and a village tracking sheet. So on the main adventure tracking sheet, there are these series of checkboxes. And let's say you have an encounter in one of the game books. And in this encounter, it will say, this thing happens to you along your journey. Mark story point Y9. So you mark the little box on your adventure sheet marked Y9. And what that does is when you come to a certain event later in the book, it will say, you see a chef standing in the kitchen, and he turns around and he looks at you quizzically. If you have story point Y9 marked, read this entry. If you don't, read this other entry. So that's a pretty interesting system. When something changes and you make a decision, your decisions do have weight in this world, and they are remembered.
Right.
And I really like that, because some video games don't manage to give you that feeling of consequence for your decisions.
It just, the feeling of consequence, and that the world is changing, and there's no way for you to really kind of predict how things are going to happen or what path these things are going to take, because it might not be obvious that how this interaction would influence, but that somehow it has altered the world state.
Yes. Which I find to be a very compelling part of this game, and a great idea for trying to make a DM-less world where the bookkeeping isn't super heavy for you. And like Carter said, not only do you track story progress in that way, which does measure things as large as, big epic decisions that shape the plot as a whole, that plot point mechanic, or that story point mechanic, is also used to map your interactions with other characters. So one way that you develop relationships with characters in the game is if you decide to interact with them in an angry way, for instance, you might mark one story point. Whereas if you interact with them in a nice and pleasurable way, then you mark another. And then in the future, how that character reacts to you will depend on which story points are marked. So it's a very compelling system.
Yes.
And then on top of that, like Carter said, you're tracking your time through this world. So there are these little boxes on your village tracking sheet that will say morning hour 1, 2, 3 on day 1, and afternoon hour 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, evening hour 1, 2, 3. Yeah, if you go and do an activity, it'll say time passes, and you mark that time has passed on your character sheet, and that's how days pass. This whole game takes place over 7 days. And so there's a sense of urgency about where you choose to go and how you choose to spend your time, which I think is great. That you can't just mess around in the city the whole time buying equipment or powering up, and then you become too powerful for whatever's coming later. And also there's a sense of movement in the world. So if I go to a tavern in the morning, it's closed.
Right. Or for instance, businesses are open during the beginning of the day, but not at night.
Yes. You choose to go to a location and it will say, okay, if the book will say, if it's morning, read this entry. If it's morning on day 2, read this one. You get totally different interactions depending on what day you go to the same location or what time of day you go. There are different clientele there. If it's a business, it's to me, the time tracking and the story tracking together really make the world feel dynamic.
Yeah. So while I guess the combat system and kind of tracking your decisions as a character and your interactions is very like compelling and an interesting mechanic, it's still, I would say overall, like left me pretty unsatisfied actually making my way through these decisions.
I agree, and that's not something I expected from this game because this is a diceless system, which is one of the things we didn't mention at the beginning of the game, but the way your skills work is you pick those skills at the beginning of the game, and then you read a story point in the book, and you're presented with a decision, usually, just like a choose-your-own-adventure book, like Carter mentioned earlier. You have a decision, and like, let's say you're having a conversation with someone and you're trying to convince them to sell you an item at a cheaper price. The story point might say, if you have skill negotiation, read this entry. If you have skill theft, read this entry. If you don't have any of these skills, read this entry.
Right.
And here's the thing about a system like that. If you don't have the skills that this particular situation has decided are the only skills you could use to address the problem at hand, then that last option of if you don't have these skills, read this entry, it is never good for you and it is never satisfying for you.
No, yeah, you don't really feel like you got to make a choice because it doesn't, the skills that you choose, and for my character, I chose less skills and had more stamina. And I felt like there were lots of situations to where there were a lot of skills listed that I just weren't able to take. And so I just didn't have as many story options. And it creates a feeling of I'm missing out on content is really what it feels like. I'm getting less story. I'm getting less interesting results. It's only a very kind of like bland response, I feel like, most of the time.
And it doesn't allow you to have the creativity that really is the hallmark of participating in an RPG.
Right.
The beautiful thing about an RPG is I can come up to any interaction or any fight because combat's resolved in the same way as interactions. If you have alchemy, read this entry. If you have brawling, read this entry. The beautiful thing about an RPG is I can come to those situations and I can basically figure out any solution I want to that problem. And as long as I have a quick thinking DM, they can handle it.
Right.
But in this situation, because there has to be some constraints in order for this adventure to fit inside of a book, I would approach, for instance, a room with a lot of enemies in it. And I'm not the kind of character that would, personality-wise or skill-wise, want to rush headlong into this room and fight. But the story entry doesn't give me the option as a roguelike character of trying to sneak around. There's no option for trying to sneak. There's no option for trying to hang back and listen. The options are, if you have archery, read this entry. If you have alchemy, read this entry. If you don't have those things, then prepare to take damage, basically.
Right. That means that your character, like, flung themselves headlong into combat or something like that.
Right. Or they suddenly notice you and the enemy suddenly notice you and you don't even have a chance to try to use your stealth abilities. That missing out piece is really crucial for me because I've picked what I thought was a pretty diverse array of skills. And I, for whatever reason, just felt like this game does not have the ability to manage a rogue character. And a rogue is a pretty standard fantasy trope. And they push you toward making that sort of character as well. They say this is the kind of character that you can make and be successful in this game. And it just doesn't work.
Right. And to kind of go along with that, outside of just combat decisions, so you spend time thinking about what kind of background and personality that your character has. And then when you are in a social situation that maybe isn't related to skills, all of your social interactions are being very gregarious and friendly, or just ignoring them and going off or leaving.
Yeah, I think that's where you really start to bump up against the limits of this system. I mean, there were so many opportunities where my character is standing in a room and there's a creature in front of me, and my only options are use alchemy or take damage. And my character has a brawling skill. Why can I not punch this thing in the face? That's the sort of situation where a DM would be able to say, of course you can punch it in the face. Why wouldn't you be able to? But this book, because somebody didn't pre-think that option, I just don't have the ability to do it.
Here's a question. Do you think that the game would be any more enjoyable to you if they listed, say, 5 pre-made characters, and the story had those characters in mind and were kind of balanced specifically towards those characters, their kind of personalities and backgrounds, and you played one of those through the adventure?
I think so. I mean, of course, if you take that kind of route with this game, then you definitely lose out on a main aspect of the RPG kind of experience, which is creating my own character. And there is something great about taking ownership of a character. That's part of what made me so excited about this in the beginning when doing the character creation stuff. But if it doesn't work to make your own, then yeah, I would definitely rather have something like that. I think that would fit a lot better in this world.
That's kind of the impression I got as we're just talking about, thinking that I think this system would handle that better than me coming with my preconceived notion of a background and idea of what my character would like, and it really not being able to do that, and the world not really feeling, or my options not really feeling super balanced towards it just having as many options as I want to have to play my character.
Yeah, I would say that's true, because ultimately this led to the game being a very unsatisfying experience for me overall, because first of all, I was only able to go on one quest, really. I just happened to stumble upon it in this game just when wandering the world, and I went in, and it's essentially a dungeon type setting, which you would expect to find in a fantasy world, and I got my butt handed to me because none of the skills that I picked at the beginning of the game happened to be skills that were usable in this dungeon. And if you were playing an RPG, my skills would have been the sort of thing that could have at least got me somewhere in the dungeon. I would have at least been able to make some kind of progress. But I felt like I was just smacking my head against the wall the whole time because I didn't pick the 3 skills that the designers had in mind for addressing this dungeon. It just feels so linear.
Yeah, that I think it kind of goes to the idea that it made me not feel powerful or engaged with my character because of that. And I mean, as a for instance, in the town of Dragonholt, I get a clue or an idea of this is an adventure I could possibly go on. And then I follow up on it and try to do that adventure because I want to be cool and do cool things. And when I try to do it, oh, well, I'm not famous enough to do it yet.
Yeah, you don't just get quests. People don't just run up to you in the middle of town and bring you a letter, for instance, that says, hey, you need to go on this quest. You have to kind of find them on your own. And so it's possible not to complete all of the adventures that are in the box on your first playthrough, because you're spending time doing things around town or talking to different people. You can totally miss out on entire quests in this game. So that definitely happened to me. And at the beginning of the game, there is this one opportunity to go on a pretty low-level entry quest, I suspect. But same thing happened to me. I go to the place where I could get the quest, and the story point says, you must have 3 fame to go on this quest. Well, I haven't had any opportunities to earn fame yet.
Right. They're just desperately searching for something to do around this town.
Yeah, that's what I ended up doing, was how can I do something in town that will get me a quest, or how can I do something that will get me fame? And I just couldn't find it. I ended up spending probably 90% of my time with this game in the village trying to figure out what I needed to do to unlock quests and finding out that I either didn't have the right skills to unlock a quest, or I didn't have enough fame, or the whole experience just made me feel like I'm twiddling my thumbs waiting for adventure to happen to me, and I'm just not skilled enough to find it.
Right.
So
here, and this is something, do you think if you played this game in like an online or app type setting, like if it was just digital, what do you think you would lose?
I don't think you would really lose anything. I guess the only thing I can think of is the tactile nature of actually picking up the town map and holding it and saying, I want to go to this location. It's sort of, that bit to me was pretty immersive, figuring out where I wanted to go in town, but that could be easily handled with like a little mini map in menu type thing.
I guess, yeah, because that's one thing I really like about board games is the tactile parts, moving things around. And mostly I just had the map laid out in front of me, and I just had the book, whatever I was using, and I'm just flipping through it to the different like encounter like numbers and writing things down on like the encounter tracker. And that was most of the physicality.
Yes.
Was me doing bookkeeping.
Yes, I agree. Even the cards, I only managed to get 2 or 3 of the cards, which are items that you find in the game.
Right.
And so yeah, the whole time all you're holding is a pencil and a book, and it ends up feeling like a very unsatisfying choose your own adventure story.
Which is sad because the production quality of the game is fantastic.
Oh yeah, it's made by Fantasy Flight, so it's everything that you would expect from Fantasy Flight. The writing is good.
The art is good, the quality of materials, I don't feel like I'm really interacting with things. It's like, okay, I pull this item out of the item deck, and then it sits there and does nothing. Yeah,
I do feel like it does a good job of giving you opportunities to build relationships with characters that you talk to in town. I feel like the world and the characters and your relationships with both of those things are very dynamic.
Yes.
But beyond that, there is nothing compelling or interesting for me. I barely know what the story of this game is because I wasn't allowed to figure out the story.
Right.
I wasn't allowed to participate in it because the world couldn't handle the very basic character type that I created. So at this point, I think it's probably time for us to just summarize our thoughts here. We're going to talk about which things in the game we thought were good, the things that we thought were bad, and the things that we thought were just downright ugly. Carter, things for you that are good about this game.
I think the way it's written, the way the characters are written is done really well. Like I said earlier, I think the production quality of the game is top notch. I mean, just very standard for what Fantasy Flight puts out, honestly. I think maybe the bones of the system is really good and elegant in how that works. Obviously, I'm like disappointed in how it like played out with this particular game, but I think there's definitely something good in the core system of it that I really, really like.
Yeah, this, for me, one of the positives of this game is that story point tracker and the time tracker, that makes for a very interesting type of world that I want to revisit in a different setting. I think they have a lot of work to do to try to make this a more compelling system, but it does sound like Fantasy Flight is interested in trying to make this Oracle system work for other settings. I would love to revisit whatever game comes out next in this series to see if they manage to improve on the things that we're concerned about.
Definitely.
So yeah, definitely I agree with you about the writing. I love the story point system. I love the rules. I love the simplicity of getting into this game. I thought that was definitely a highlight. And I love that this is a game that to me is best one player. As many problems as I had with it, I have to say I cannot imagine playing this with multiple people. I think all the problems that we have would just be magnified if we had a group of people here.
Absolutely.
So if you're looking for an RPG-like experience that handles one player, this is definitely something to look into because there's really nothing else like it on the market.
I would almost say if you don't really care about having role-playing a character that you created, I would think it'd probably be better with that expectation because I would just do whatever I wanted to in those moments, maybe.
Right. But that's brings us back to the bad and the ugly,
yeah.
which for me is all rolled into one here. The bad stuff is really bad in this game. And that is the lack of freedom. The constricting nature of this game is what kills it for me. There's just no room to really role play here.
Right. And that's what I was expecting. and that's where it came up most short. Yeah, it comes down to how making choices feel, like how making choices felt to me was normally a negative experience.
Yes. And, you could say by the end of the game, I was disappointed. I was disappointed that by the end of the game, I had only managed to go on the intro tutorial quest and one other quest that just kicked my rear. Beyond that, I haven't really experienced much of the game. I feel like I didn't have much of a chance to experience this game. And so I get to the end of this pretty long gaming experience, and I think, what did I even accomplish here? Did I even make a mark on this world? And one of the things that's great about RPGs, the greatest moments in RPGs come when your character has a moment to shine and where you feel like you did something epic and awesome. That never happened for me in this game.
Right. Yeah, I ended up giving up even before getting to that point as far as you did. I just felt like I was wandering around town, not trying to solve a mystery. I just felt aimless. I wasn't trying to follow up on any specific clues because there wasn't anything direct clues. It was just bashing my head against a wall, and the result of my choices seemed arbitrary at best most of the time.
Yeah, and I would 100% agree with that, which is why, as you could probably guess, this is a game that is not getting our stamp of approval.
No. I could see where some people would still get a lot of enjoyment out of this game, but it completely fell flat for me.
Yes, and I can say, too, that if you hear this and this does still sound like a game that's interesting to you, I think you should know going in that there is some replayability to this game. I think the story does have some branching paths that things could go differently depending on what kind of character you have and maybe what decisions you make. I don't think there are a lot of branches, but I do think they exist. But one of the things that's going to make it replayable is, if you're like me, you won't make it through all the quests your first time through. So you could potentially make a second character and find your way to quests that you missed the first time. That's not a very compelling kind of replayability for me, but maybe it is for you.
Right.
So I do think you're paying $60 for a game. You want to know, does it have more than 8 hours worth of gameplay in it? And I think it does. But it's up to you to find that gameplay, essentially.
Yeah.
So that's what we think of it. It's not the worst game I've ever played. It's pretty close.
To the worst game?
No, okay. It's not really the worst game I've ever played. It's fine. It has a lot of really interesting things in it, but I definitely won't be revisiting this one anytime soon. It's on the trade pile for me. But I do look forward to seeing what they do with this system next. Yeah. If they were to work out some of these kinks and, say, set it in feudal Japan, I am there in a heartbeat. So I think this has a lot of promise.
Yeah, the system has promise. Maybe they could even revisit it in this world. I mean, the world's not compelling, but if the system was better, I think it would. I could maybe get more engaged with it. Yeah, and I do think there's a chance that they revisit it in this world, because this is, we should have said at the beginning, this particular fantasy world is the same one where Descent is set and Rune Wars, and they've been trying to build that world of Terranoth for a while. The Runebound games take place in the same world. So, you know, they have been trying to build this up for a while. It's not the most compelling to me either, but I could see them revisiting it. If they want to set this in the world of Twilight Imperium and we can get some space lions up in here. Yeah. All about that. But until then, I'm pretty much done with the Legacy of Dragonholt. Yeah. This will be my last go. Yeah. And that's all for this episode. I'm Brandon Waite. I'm Carter Mackey. And this has been Solosaurus.